It is a bright morning in a comfortable Victorian parlor, and you are the woman of the house, and you are proud of this room. You have every reason to be. The walls are the most beautiful color you have ever owned, a deep and glowing green, the green of new leaves and deep summer, a color so rich and so vivid that visitors remark on it the moment they step through the door. It cost a great deal, that wallpaper, and it was worth every penny because it makes the whole house feel alive. You take a soft cloth this morning and you dust along the top of the skirting and the edges of the paper, the way you do every week, and a faint, fine powder comes away gray on the cloth, and you think nothing of it at all. Dust is dust. Every house has it. On the mantel there is a small bottle, and before you sit down to your letters, you take a spoonful of what is inside it, the way you do most mornings, because your physician prescribed it, and it is good for you. It is a clear tonic, faintly medicinal, and it is meant to settle your nerves and clear your complexion and generally set you right. And it comes from the chemist with the doctor's own blessing. Later you will dress for a call, and you will pass a wafer between your lips to keep your skin pale and clear and fashionable, because a lady's skin should be white as porcelain. And there is a preparation sold for exactly that, and every fashionable woman you know takes it. On the side table, a vase of artificial flowers glows the same impossible green as the walls, never wilting, always perfect. You are a careful woman. You keep a clean, healthy, modern, tasteful home. There is not one thing in this bright green room that you would think to fear, and nearly every one of the things I have just described to you contained arsenic. Let me stop there and step into the frame myself, because this is a story that needs a steady hand and a plain voice, and I would rather you heard it from someone who has spent a lifetime looking at what poisons actually do, and who therefore has no appetite whatsoever for making it lurid. My name is Hollis. For the better part of 40 years I was a coroner and a pathologist, the man they sent for when a death would not explain itself, and the family, and sometimes the law, needed to know precisely and honestly what had happened. That is the whole of my trade, the careful, unhurried reconstruction of how a thing came to pass, not to gasp at it, to understand it. And this particular story has been badly served by the gaspers, which is the reason I want to tell it properly. You have probably half heard it. The mad Victorians who wore poison and drank poison and papered their nurseries with it, the lot of them practically asking to be killed. And that version is fun, and it is lazy, and it is not really true. The truth is stranger and much more human than that. It is the story of an entire civilization that fell in love with a substance because it was cheap and beautiful and useful and everywhere, and that did not understand, until the bodies had quietly accumulated over decades, what a bargain it had actually struck. And let me be as plain as I can be at the very top, because with this subject it matters more than usual. Everything I am about to tell you is history. It is not advice. Nothing in it is a recommendation about your health or anyone's then or now, and nothing in it should be taken as one. There will be no method here, no how, no dose, nothing you could act upon even if you were foolish enough to want to. This is the account of a mistake made by a whole society at once, a beautiful, fashionable, respectable mistake, and of what it slowly cost, nothing more and nothing less. To understand how a careful woman came to dust poison off her own walls without a flicker of alarm, you have to understand what arsenic was in that century, because it was not what the word means to you now. To you, arsenic is a murder mystery word, a skull and crossbones word, a thing kept under lock and key. To the Victorians it was something closer to salt. It was cheap. It was abundant. a byproduct of smelting metals like copper and tin, produced in enormous quantity by the industry of the age. It was sold openly and casually by chemists and grocers and colormen for pennies to more or less anyone. And crucially, this is the fact that makes the whole century make sense. The most common form of it, a fine white powder, was very nearly tasteless and dissolved cleanly into food or drink. So it went everywhere. It went into the medicine cabinet and onto the dressing table, and into the pot of paint and the bolt of cloth and the box of sweets and the child's painted toy. It went into the walls, a society that had a cheap, powerful, colorful, versatile substance, and that did not yet understand the slow arithmetic of what it did to a body over years, did exactly what any society would do with such a thing. It used it for absolutely everything. And I want you to hold that ordinariness in your mind, because the horror of this story is not some gothic wickedness. The horror is how normal it all was. This was not a poison lurking in the shadows. This was a poison sold in the daylight, admired, recommended, and dusted lovingly every week by the very people it was slowly making ill. Let me begin where the woman in our parlor began her morning, with the spoonful of tonic, because the single most respectable place arsenic lived in that century was not in the poisoner's cupboard. It was on the physician's prescription pad. There was a genuine, mainstream, widely prescribed medicine of the age, and its common name was Fowler's solution. It was, to put it plainly, a carefully diluted preparation of arsenic, potassium arsenite in water, to give it its proper description, and it had been in the medical repertoire since the late 1700s. And it was not quackery at the fringes. It was prescribed by serious, qualified doctors for a truly astonishing range of complaints, right through the 1800s and in some quarters well beyond. What did they give it for? Very nearly everything. It was used against malaria, the ague, the recurring fevers, in the days before better remedies existed. And here I must be fair to it, because in that particular use it may have done some genuine good. It was given for stubborn diseases of the skin, for the scaling and the itching of conditions we would now call psoriasis and eczema, and again, unsettlingly, it sometimes seemed to help. It was given for the nerves, for tiredness, for a general want of vigor, a tonic, a pick-me-up, a bottled promise that you would feel more yourself. It was even taken, in some circles, to improve the bloom of the complexion from within. A doctor of standing might prescribe this to a respectable patient with a completely clear conscience, and that patient might take a measured spoonful every morning for years. And here is the quietly terrible thing about it, the thing that let it survive so long. In the short run, on the right day, in the right small amount, it could appear to work. The patient felt brighter, the skin sometimes cleared, and so both the doctor and the patient had the evidence of their own eyes that the medicine was doing good, while, in the long, slow accounting that no one was yet keeping, a body taking small regular amounts of arsenic year upon year was being asked to bear a burden it was never built to carry. I am not going to walk you through what that burden does. It is not necessary, and it would not be kind to the people who bore it. I will only say that the tonic that promised vigor was, in the long view, buying that brightness on a terrible kind of credit. And the bill, when it came slowly and quietly, and disguised as a dozen other ordinary illnesses of the age, which is precisely why nobody sent it back. Now let us move from the mantelpiece to the dressing table, because if the tonic was the respectable face of arsenic, the beauty counter was its seductive one. And to me, it is the saddest chapter of the whole affair. You have to understand the beauty ideal of the age to understand why women did this to themselves. To be beautiful in the Victorian imagination was to be pale, white skin, clear and translucent as fine china, unmarked by the sun and untouched by the coarse ruddiness of outdoor labor. Paleness was not merely pretty. It was a signal that you were a lady, that you did not toil in a field or a factory, that you belonged indoors and above. And so a clear white complexion became something women were willing to chase at almost any cost. And the market, as markets do, rushed to meet the demand. There appeared, sold openly and advertised freely, complexion wafers, little tablets a woman was meant to swallow to clear her skin and lighten it from within, and complexion soaps and washes and creams, many of which contained arsenic, and some of which advertised the fact as a positive selling point, because arsenic was believed to give exactly that coveted pale, clear, luminous look. The advertising was shameless and it was clever. It promised beauty and confidence, and the admiration of every room a woman entered. It sold, in other words, precisely what people have always been most willing to poison themselves to obtain. And it may even, in a bitter and short-lived way, have appeared to deliver. There is a grim logic to it that I want you to see clearly, because it is the same logic that runs under this entire story. A substance that quietly interferes with the body can produce, for a time, effects that a person chasing an ideal will read as success, a certain pallor, a certain look. The mirror said it was working. The compliments said it was working, and so a woman would continue, buying her beauty by the wafer, with no notion whatsoever that the very glow she was cultivating and the slow harm she was accepting were, in the end, the same transaction seen from two sides. She was not vain or foolish, any more than you are foolish for the things our own age asks us to swallow and smear and inject in the name of looking well. She was doing exactly what she had been told, by every authority she trusted, would make her beautiful. That is not a story about silly women. It never is. And this is the point in the story where I must stop and hand you a genuine historical puzzle, and be honest with you that I cannot fully solve it, because the honest thing is more interesting than a tidy one. There is a persistent tale from the mountainous region of Styria, in what is now Austria, of peasants, the so-called arsenic eaters, who were reported to eat arsenic deliberately and regularly, in quantities that ought by rights to have killed an ordinary person, and who claimed that it gave them wind for climbing the steep hills, and a fine healthy bloom to the complexion, and vigor generally. The story went that they began with tiny amounts and, over long habit, built up a tolerance, so that they could take doses that would fell a stranger. It was reported by travelers and written up in the medical press of the 19th century, and it fed directly into the era's dangerous confidence that arsenic, taken habitually, might be not merely survivable but positively good for you. Now, I want to flag this loudly because it matters. The Styrian arsenic eaters are reported history, not settled fact. How widespread the practice truly was, how much was exaggeration or misunderstanding by outside observers, whether and how a real tolerance was genuinely built. All of this is debated and has been picked over by historians and toxicologists ever since, and I am not going to pretend to you that it is nailed down, because it is not. Treat it as a fascinating and contested piece of folklore that the Victorians themselves half believed, and be a little suspicious, as I am, of anyone who tells the tale as though it were simple. What is not in doubt is the effect the legend had. It gave a frightening substance a whisper of respectability, a rumor that it might be tamed, And rumors like that are exactly how a society talks itself into keeping a poison on the breakfast table. But of all the places arsenic hid in that century, the most beautiful, the most beloved, and in the end the most quietly dangerous, was the one our woman was dusting at the very start. The color green. You must try to imagine the world before cheap, brilliant, reliable color. For most of human history, a truly vivid green was hard to make and harder to keep. It faded, it dulled, it turned to mud. And then in the 1770s, a chemist named Carl Wilhelm Scheele produced a green pigment of startling brilliance, a green that glowed, that held its color, that was cheap to make in quantity. It was called Scheele's green, and it was made with arsenic, copper arsenite to be exact. A little later came an improved and even more vivid version, known by names like Paris green and emerald green, also built on arsenic, and it took the whole visual world of the 19th century by storm. Understand what a temptation this was. Here was a color more beautiful than anything the market had ever offered, and it was cheap, and it was stable, and there was, at first, no obvious reason on earth not to use it for everything. And so they used it for everything. It went into paint. It went into the dyes of dresses and gloves and ribbons, so that a fashionable woman might dance an evening away in a gown colored with arsenic. It went into the artificial flowers I mentioned, those perfect never-wilting blooms in the parlor vase, made by workers who handled the green powder by the day. It went into candle wax and toys and the covers of books, and by some accounts, and this one truly stops the breath, into the coloring of certain sweets and cake decorations and confectionery, and above all, in quantities beyond all the rest, it went onto the walls, into wallpaper, that glorious, glowing, fashionable green wallpaper that a proud householder hung in her parlor and her bedroom and, God help us, her children's nursery, and dusted every week and loved. And it is here that the story turns from the swallowed to the invisible, and from the individual to the whole household, because the wallpaper posed a danger of a subtler and more insidious kind than the tonic or the wafer ever did. Through the middle of the century, physicians and chemists began to notice something. Households living amid a great deal of this vivid green wallpaper seemed, at times, to fall mysteriously and chronically ill. A household sickness, wearing and hard to explain, that would ease curiously when the family went away and return when they came home. And a theory took shape to explain it. The idea was that the arsenical pigment did not simply stay politely on the wall in damp conditions, and think how damp a coal-heated, poorly ventilated house of that era could be. The paper could shed a fine arsenical dust, the very dust our woman wiped onto her cloth, and by some accounts, give off a toxic vapor as well, so that the very air of a beautiful green room might slowly, gently, and quite invisibly sicken everyone who breathed it night after night for years. This was argued seriously at the time. It was not a modern invention. There were physicians who became convinced of it, who campaigned against arsenical wallpaper, who told the public that their loveliest rooms might be poisoning them in their sleep. The exact mechanism, how much was dust, how much was genuine vapor, how much depended on which paper and which conditions, was debated then and is debated still. And I will not overstate a singular certainty where the science is genuinely tangled. But that green wallpaper could make a household ill is the sober, defensible heart of it. And attached to this, like a barnacle, is the single most famous claim of the whole affair, which I am obliged both to tell you and to flag very firmly. It has long been suggested, and you will find it repeated everywhere as though it were established fact. that the decline and death of Napoleon Bonaparte, in his exile on the remote island of St. Helena, was hastened by arsenic given off by the green wallpaper of the damp house he was kept in. It is a wonderful story. Traces of arsenic have indeed been reported in samples associated with him, and the wallpaper of his residence is said to have carried an arsenical green. But I must be honest with you as a man who has spent his life weighing causes of death. This is a disputed hypothesis, not a settled verdict. Arsenic was so universal in that world in so many everyday things that finding traces of it proves far less than the tellers of the tale would like. Whether it contributed to his end, and if so how much, against all the other candidates for a sick man's decline, remains genuinely and honestly unresolved. So enjoy the story by all means, but hold it as a maybe and be wary of anyone who sells it to you as a certainty. There is one more room in this house of arsenic we must walk through, and it is the darkest, and I will walk you through it soberly and quickly, because it is a matter of history and forensics, not of spectacle. It is the reason arsenic earned its grim old title, the king of poisons and the poison of kings. For centuries, arsenic had a fearsome reputation as the murderer's friend, and the reasons were coldly practical, and they are the same reasons I have already given you. It was cheap, and it could be bought without remark. It was, in its common white form, very nearly tasteless, and could be given in food or drink undetected. And this is the cruel heart of it. The illness it produced closely resembled the ordinary, rampant, natural diseases of the age. In a century in which cholera and gastric fevers carried people off by the thousand with symptoms of the stomach, a death by arsenic could look, to a grieving family, and even to an honest doctor, exactly like one more visitation of natural illness. There was no reliable way to look into the body afterward and say, this was no fever, this was poison. And so arsenic offered a poisoner something almost unique, a weapon that hid itself inside the ordinary mortality of the time. That is why it was the king of poisons, not because it was the most violent, but because it was the most invisible. And then, in 1836, a British chemist named James Marsh changed the arithmetic entirely. He developed a test. It carries his name to this day, the Marsh test, that could detect arsenic reliably in the tissues of a body, and even display the evidence in a form a court could be shown. And I want you to feel what a genuine turning point this was, because it is the one clean note of triumph in the whole grim symphony. For the first time, the invisible could be made visible. The poison that had hidden inside natural illness for centuries could now be dragged out into the light of a courtroom and named. The perfect weapon had, quite suddenly, a flaw. Detection had caught up with the crime. It did not end the misuse of arsenic overnight, nothing does, but it marked the moment the balance began decisively to tip, and forensic science took one of its great strides forward. It is a rare and welcome thing in these stories of mine, a moment where the cleverness of the age was bent, for once, entirely toward the good. So how did a civilization climb back down from a substance it had woven into its walls and its wardrobes and its medicine and its very sweets? Slowly, grudgingly, household by household and law by law. As the century wore on, the evidence accumulated from the campaigning physicians, from the sicken households, from the workers in the trades who handled the green powders and paid for it, from the growing unease about a poison sold as freely as flour. Pressure built for the sale of arsenic to be controlled, for it to be recorded, colored to make it distinguishable, kept from being handed across a counter to anyone at all without a second thought. Measures came in stages to regulate its sale. The bright arsenical greens slowly fell out of favor as safer pigments were found, and as the public grew wary of that once-beloved color, the arsenical patent remedies and complexion aids gradually lost their innocence in the public mind, and over time their place on the shelf. It was not a single grand act of deliverance. It was a long, uneven retreat, the slow unlearning of a love affair, spread across decades, which is, if you have watched this series, exactly how these things always go. Societies fall for a dangerous marvel fast, in a rush of delight, and they climb back out of it slowly, one hard-won piece of evidence at a time. Poison, ladies and gentlemen, do not eat the wallpaper. Obviously. I allow myself that one line, and only because I need its sharp edge to make the turn that is the whole reason I have kept you here. Because it would be so easy, so very comfortable to close the file on the Victorians with a smug little shudder. To picture them as a nation of doomed eccentrics, drinking their poison and papering their nurseries with it, and to feel, by lovely contrast, so clever and so safe ourselves. And that comfortable picture is a lie, and I have spent too long with the truth to hand it to you on the way out. These were not mad people. Look again at everything I have described and notice what actually drove it. Arsenic was cheap, so it was accessible to everyone. It was useful. It really did seem to ease the fever and clear the skin in the short run before the bill came due. It was beautiful that green was genuinely the loveliest color anyone had ever hung on a wall, and it carried the blessing of authority. The doctor prescribed the tonic, the advertisement promised the beauty, the whole respectable world agreed it was fine. Cheap, useful, beautiful, and endorsed. Put those four things together and an entire sane, careful, loving civilization will dust poison off its own walls every week, and never once think to be afraid. And this is where I turn away from that green parlor, and turn, gently, to you. Because I did not walk you through all of this so that you could feel superior to a dead woman with beautiful walls. I felt the temptation to, and I resisted it, and I would ask you to resist it too. Because not one of those four ingredients has gone anywhere. We still love things because they are cheap and everywhere. We still reach, gratefully, for what seems useful and eases our discomfort today, without keeping the long, slow ledger of what it might be doing across the years. We are, if anything, more enthralled than ever to what is beautiful and fashionable, and promises to make us look well. And we still, rightly and necessarily, trust our doctors and our advertisers and our experts and the whole great respectable consensus of our age. As we mostly should, because mostly it is right. The exact four forces that put arsenic in the tonic and the wafer and the wallpaper are the water you and I swim in this very morning. So here is the question I would genuinely like you to sit with, and it is not a comfortable one, and it is not meant to be. Not, how could they have been so foolish, but rather, what is it right now in our own bright and modern lives that is cheap and everywhere that seems to help, that we find beautiful or convenient, and that the trusted authorities of our day assure us is perfectly safe, that a careful person 100 years from now will read about and set down their cup and go very quiet? Because there is something. There is always something. Every age is certain it has finally sorted the marvels from the poisons, and every age is partly wrong, and does not yet know which part. The woman dusting her green wall was not more foolish than you. She was you with the same trust, the same eye for beauty, the same reasonable faith in the people who told her it was fine, and a little less hindsight than you were handed, for free, by the people who paid to learn it. The lesson is not to fear everything and trust nothing. That way lies its own quiet madness, and you would never take a sensible medicine or enjoy a beautiful thing again. The lesson is smaller and harder than that. It is that cheap and useful and beautiful and endorsed are four things a substance can be while still, slowly, costing you, and that the largest, gentlest mistakes are made not by the reckless, but by the comfortable, the fashionable, and the reassured. And that is exactly what I would love to hear from you down in the comments, because I do read them. And this is a question I find myself honestly curious about rather than merely clever over. What do you think it is? What is something in our own homes and our own routines, cheap, common, useful, fashionable, blessed by the experts, and dusted off without a second thought, that you quietly suspect our great-grandchildren will look back on the way we now look back on a nursery papered in poison green? Tell me what you think they will go quiet about. I should very much like to read what you see. A young colleague of mine, I will call him Toby, for he would go the exact shade of that wallpaper if I used his real name, asked me, when I was first turning this story over, whether it ever stops being unsettling, learning that the ordinary furniture of ordinary lives was quietly dangerous all along. And I told him the truth, which is no, it does not, and that the day it stops unsettling you is the day you have stopped paying proper attention. An old head nurse I worked beside for years, a woman who had truly seen everything and been shaken by none of it, used to say that the most dangerous things in any house are never the ones people are afraid of. They are the ones people have grown to love. She was right, of course. She usually was. For my part, I will keep doing what old coroners do, which is telling you the true and careful reasons behind things, one story at a time, with respect for everyone in them and no false comfort at the end. If you would like to sit in on the next one, and there are a great many of these stories still to tell, then do subscribe, and I will keep them coming. This has been the story of a poison that a whole civilization wore and drank and hung upon its walls because it was cheap and useful and beautiful and blessed. Be a little kinder to those green-walled households than the jokes allow, and be a little more careful with the lovely, everyday, well-endorsed certainties of your own bright morning than feels entirely comfortable. My name is Hollis. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you at the next one.